Welcome to week 5. This week we are going to be discussing time management. This is a skill that many of you have shared you'd like to improve. Now it's safe to say at some point or another, all of us has struggled with time management. And this is true especially when we take on new roles and responsibilities and add them to what we're already doing in our daily lives. I hope that this week you're able to reflect on how you're spending your time, as well as gain new strategies and more effective ways of organizing your time. I hope that you also view the Big Rocks lecture or video in our week 5 module. I find that video to be very helpful in gaining a new perspective of prioritizing and how much that's important when we're trying to be more effective with time management. So why is learning time management so important? Well, first of all, it reduces stress and anxiety. So it goes without saying that when we're able to prepare ahead of time and be proactive and be more organized with our time, we reduce the experiences of stress and even being anxious about performing certain tasks. It also reduces the fear of failure. It reduces completing tasks at a mediocre level. So let's say you have a project due for work or for school, and you want to perform at your best as much as possible. Being able to create time and prepare ahead is obviously going to make that more of an experience where you can meet standards and expectations rather than performing at an average or mediocre level. In turn, when you are able to do that, it can improve your confidence, your self-esteem, which does affect your level of motivation, which keeps you going and progressing towards your goals. Being able to prepare also makes the day run more smoothly, and we definitely all want that to happen. How can you manage your time and not let it manage you? First of all, you want to look at how many things you're committing to. Work, school, your relationships with family, friends, your social activities, maybe even your spiritual life and how much you commit to that. And also our self-care, exercise, eating well, and taking care of ourselves. These are all priorities that we can have in our daily lives. But it's also important to take a look at how much you're committing to and whether you have enough time for that. So some questions that you want to ask yourself as you create this list of commitments is, are you being realistic? And are you being proactive in planning ahead to make sure that you meet all of the actions and responsibilities that are required of these commitments? Remember, you won't have time unless you make the time. And that is always the hardest part. So let's look at different ways that we can organize our time. So next, we are going to cover Stephen Covey's quadrant time management system. So in chapter 14 of your textbook, you are introduced to the time management matrix. Now this matrix is going to be very important in homework number 3, which is your time management assignment due later this month. So really pay attention to this portion in chapter 14 as well as this lecture. So Stephen Covey is an author and educator that created the time management quadrant system to help us place our actions into particular quadrants based on whether it's urgent or important. So the question is, which quadrant do most of your actions fall into? So to answer that, we need to get a better understanding of what these quadrants represent. So quadrant 1 are actions that are urgent and important. Quadrant 2 are those that are not urgent, but they are important. Quadrant 3 would be for the urgent and not important actions. And then finally, quadrant 4 would be for non-urgent and non-important actions. Now, quadrant 2 is highlighted in yellow, and that's because the goal is to place most of our actions in quadrant 2. And that's because quadrant 2 actions are really those that we are proactive about and that we plan ahead for. So we create the time for these actions. As you can see in the example here, creating a study group in the first week of the semester is an example of a quadrant 2 action. Quadrant 1, some students get confused as this being the ideal place. But what you'll really see here are actions that are mostly what procrastinators would do. So staying up all night cramming for an 8 a.m. test is an example of that. So let's move forward into the next slide where you'll see other specific descriptions of what would fall into these quadrants. And this is really going to help you in homework number 3 to identify what you're doing every day or even in a week and figure out where are all your actions lying. So in quadrant 1, again, these are important and urgent. Now, when you hear that, it sounds like, oh yeah, I need to get all of my actions in there. But again, this goes back to that procrastinating feeling. The actions here are activities that are done under the pressure of nearing deadlines, and they usually become critical. They must be done right away, or the consequences may not be in your favor. So what does that cause? That causes stress and that anxiety that we were talking about earlier. So again, procrastinators tend to dive into this quadrant. Handling an action that has always been important becomes urgent, and so it needs to get done right away, which causes a lot of stress. On the other hand, quadrant 2 would be the important actions, but they're not urgent. So knowing that something important needs to get done and planning ahead for it is really the ideal situation. So you don't feel the pressure of any looming deadlines, and you're engaging in an important activity with enough time to do it. So another important thing about quadrant 2 is these are actions that really benefit your long-term goals. So it's important, if something benefits you in the long run, to make sure that you make time, you have time to put into it. Quadrant 3 would be for the not important but the urgent actions. So these are unimportant activities done with a sense of urgency. So they really don't have any effect, or they're not relevant to your own goals, but they could be something that you agree to for the sake of maybe supporting somebody, pleasing somebody, or being there for somebody else, as an example. So this is usually a situation where you're not able to say no, or you're not allowing yourself to say no, and you're allowing someone else's urgency to take over. Quadrant 4, these are not important and not urgent. So activities in this quadrant are just what we call time wasters. So you need to be very conscious of the choices that you make, especially if they fall into this section very often. So if you're just sitting on the couch watching TV when you could be taking care of something that you planned for in quadrant 2, or something that is important, then you really need to be mindful of what you're doing and whether or not you're putting a lot more into quadrant 4. Now, it's not to say that everything needs to be in quadrant 2. In fact, I do believe that there is a healthy balance if you have actions that are spread out nicely in each quadrant. The goal is to not allow yourself to fall into the quadrant 1 and especially not the quadrant 4 actions very often. That's when you need to know you really need to change your time management skills. Assessing your quadrant status. So a good question to ask is, will what I'm doing now positively affect my life 1 year from today? If the answer is yes, then you are in quadrant 1 or 2. If the answer is no, you're probably in quadrant 3 or 4. So that's another way to determine, where you're at with what you're doing. And surprisingly, when students do the time management assignment, they actually find that they have a healthy balance in quadrant 1 and 2, which is really a good thing. So managing study time, since we're in this academic environment, we definitely want to touch on study time. So some of you may already be familiar with the general rule of study, but if you're not, this will give you a breakdown of what is expected from you in terms of how many units you might be taking each semester. So in general, 1 unit equals 1 hour of class time per week. So the general study time rule is for every 1 unit you're taking, you should be studying 2 hours outside of class per week. So what does this mean for you? So if you're taking 12 units, you really should be following these guidelines here in the bullet points. So 12 units, remember, is the time that you spend in class per week. So 12 units represents 12 hours of in-class time. 12 times the 2 hours of study time that are expected per week equates to 24 hours of study time per week. So when you add the 12 hours of class time plus 24 hours of study time outside of class, that equates to 36 hours of college work total. And that is why when you're taking 12 units, we refer to you as a full-time student, because it pretty much is equal to working full-time when you look at the hours. So that's a really important visual and calculation of how you're spending your time just for school. And that's not including, of course, your other responsibilities in life. So being a part-time student is not a bad thing. Being a full-time student is also not a bad thing. It really just depends on what is working for you at the moment based on all your responsibilities. So handling the rest of the world. So it's important for you to know your limits and your priorities. We all need to learn the skill of saying no. And I have to say that I am guilty of not learning that skill early on. It's really important to avoid overcommitting. Sometimes I feel even here at work, I tend to fall into quadrant 3 when I take on other tasks and responsibilities because I can't say no. And then it causes a lot of stress and anxiety. So over the years, I've learned to really learn how to appropriately say no in a way that is that I feel good about it and doesn't make others feel offended or anything like that. So it really is a skill that I think, takes some time to learn. And there's some people that are really good at it. And if you know anyone that's good at saying no, you might want to get some tips. But again, it's really important for us to know our limitations. Pay attention to your attention. Be aware of your thoughts. Is there a pressing task you need to take care of? Make an agreement with your family and your housemates. So this is important, especially now that we're all in an online learning environment. It is very important for us to have an arrangement with the people that we live with so that they're aware of your study schedule, when you need some quiet time. If it's possible, hang a do not disturb sign on your door. I know it's a little harder for us that are parents and have young children that need us. And so that's when we really need to make some adjustments and work at a time that we can really get that peace and quiet. Fighting and avoiding procrastination. So let's understand some reasons why we might procrastinate. So perfectionism, the fear of failure. So not trying at all is better than anything short of perfection. Fear of limitations. Blame can be put on procrastination rather than on the personal shortcoming. So these are some things that really reflect maybe someone who might not want to face reality and is not being realistic. So, feeling like perfectionism is it and nothing else. Having a lot of fear and insecurities about limitations and not addressing that can really put someone in a position to procrastinate and not want to get on the task ahead of time. Being unsure of the next step. So it might seem easier to procrastinate than to jump to the next level of your goal. And then facing an overwhelming task. So procrastination sometimes helps to avoid an overwhelming fear. So some of you who might have procrastinated in the past might identify with some of these bullet points. But it's important to recognize the reasons why you might procrastinate. So is it a matter of your mindset or is it a matter of time? Meaning, is it something within you and how you're approaching some of your beliefs and expectations of yourself? Or is it really time management? And if it's either, then what adjustments might you make? So if it's more of a mindset adjustment or a time management adjustment. So we've come to the end of the lecture here. And basically, I left a poem here that really kind of struck a chord with me in realizing the importance of time. And it's just not time with the actions that we put in every day. We get so caught up with everything that we do and our responsibilities, but really looking at the value of what our actions do. So this poem is called Time. So to realize the value of 1 year, ask a student who has failed a final exam. To realize the value of 1 month, ask a mother who has given birth to a premature baby. To realize the value of 1 week, ask an editor of a weekly newspaper. To realize the value of 1 hour, ask the lovers who are waiting to meet. To realize the value of 1 minute, ask a person who has missed a train, bus, or plane. To realize the value of 1 second, ask a person who has survived an accident. To realize the value of 1 millisecond, ask the person who has won a silver medal in the Olympics. Time waits for no one. Treasure every moment you have. So I hope that this lecture was helpful in helping you recognize and learn some new strategies, but also helping you reflect on maybe where or how you're approaching your time management skills. But more importantly, once you dive into homework number 3, I hope you can use what we went over today to really adjust or reflect on where you're at with time management.